Hello, human peoples. You're listening to the podcast network of Gamefully Unemployed. To support us and gain access to great exclusive podcasts like Fox Mulder is a Maniac, Tom and Jeff Watch Batman, Star Trek The Next Futurama, and our latest show, Spiel Boys, head over to patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. We do game streaming, movie nights with our patrons every Friday night, and you can even commission your own podcast about anything you want. Literally anything, within reason, and we have to do it. You are quite frankly out of excuses not to go visit patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. That's patreon.com/GAMEFULLY unemployed, which is spelled like it sounds.
Squares.
Shapes.
Wonderful squares. Hi, everybody.
In 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions of terror.
My name is David Bell.
My name is Tom Ryman. I believe that was the tagline for either Friday the 13th Part 3 or Jaws 3D.
The 3 dimensions of terror?
Or the third dimension is terror, something like that.
Oh, that checks
Doesn't
out.
that sound right? That sounds right.
That sounds more than right.
That sounds correct.
Well, you know, Tom, we just watched Cube. Wait a minute. Hold the phone.
Clutch the telephone.
We watched Cube.
We did, Dave, but let me tell you something. This is 2021's Cube, which is the Japanese remake of Cube.
ところであなたたち何者ですか?
Currently not available anywhere to watch. So if you wanted to watch along with us, you will have to quietly crime this movie.
Yes. Do a crime. Although I did see, I looked it up. I did see some review that said like it's on streaming, and I was like, no, it's not. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's on streaming somewhere.
It might be. Different streaming services have different libraries depending on where you are in the world. So that could that could
Tom.
be it, Dave.
But with ExpressVPN, you can say you're from anywhere in the world.
That's true.
Offer code Gamefully Unemployed. We don't
actually have that, although I have written more than one VPN ad for other outlets.
Here. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
But okay, so yes, this is Japanese. This is a Japanese remake of the, I want to say 1999 film, but I didn't actually look that up.
It's like 97.
97
I think.
Film Cube.
Yeah.
This is brought to you by our Patreon producer Burrito Mouth, who you might recognize for being behind most of our shape-themed episodes. Burrito Mouth had like an emergency, like he like got to me and he's like, we got to do Cube remake, and it was like, absolutely, because we're moving out of the shape slowly. What would you say is your favorite shape-themed movie we covered so far?
I have a soft spot in my heart for whatever the Reefer Madness acid one was. Do you remember that one?
That was called, wasn't that?
I think it was called. Wasn't that called The Cube? Or some shit?
It had a cube. Yeah, it had a cube one. There's also that Jim Henson one. Remember that fucking Jim Henson one?
Yeah, that was a tough watch though. That was kind of dull.
Yeah, I also enjoyed Triangle.
Oh right, Triangle was the shit. I think my favorite's Triangle.
Yeah, in terms of Cube movies, that's tough. I guess the original Cube, right?
Yeah, probably. Although Cube, I think we talked about it when we did that episode. Cube gets less good each time I watch it.
It's very dated.
It's dated. It's not to take anything away from it, because when it came out, it was super original and interesting and a real achievement in indie filmmaking. But just the tools available to indie filmmakers have gotten better over time, and like the ideas of Cube have been repeated so many times. 25 years later, they're tropes now. They're sort of rote. Right. So it's easy to forget that on when it doesn't have the same impact as when I saw it, in the 90s. But
right, you could almost say it's weird to remake such a film. But we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Do you remember the other cubes? Just while we're talking about the original.
Yes.
Because all right, so the second one was time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one, Cube Zero, I think that one went completely through me.
That was the one where we were like seeing it from the side, the point of view of like the administrators who operate the cube, if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember that. And they end up, I believe it's a prequel because I'm pretty sure the character ends up like in the cube. And I don't know. It's like implied he's the guy from the original, but I don't know if that's actually true.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, generally speaking, though, we also covered like the circle, and it's weird that
the circle wasn't bad.
The circle wasn't bad. There's a lot of like shape theme movies that are like it's about keeping people in one place.
It's like a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of these shape movies wind up being locked room premises.
Yeah, and we've talked about that premise in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
It does feel dated at this point, you know? Like I don't go into a locked room premise with good intentions. Like I just assume it's going to be not thrilling, you know? Cuz they're all kind of the same in the sense that they're all they're all like, oh, how did we get here? We don't know. You know, there's a lot of that.
I want to pause real quick and just point. I'm not actually using that term correctly. It's really just like a single location, but like because like locked room is a specific term in fiction referring to a mystery that has like that's like impossible.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
But
yeah, this is more of like an escape room premise.
Like a single location. They feel like plays almost, but like with whereas something like Hard Candy uses an entire house, even though it's still a single location, which is like, you know, similar to that movie Sleuth. The cube movies and the circle, these shape movies really restrict it down to a single room, which is interesting that so many of these shape movies do that. It's really just the 3 cube movies in Circle, but still, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's also like it's because it's the same thing. It's also I'd say the Jim Henson one, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
The Jim Henson one counts because it's always the same process, which is like, how did you get here? What's your name? Who do you think is trapping us in? And then it's always there's always like some puzzle or some it's always an allegory for like society and like how people act.
Yeah,
so there's only so many versions of that.
Yeah, it's function defining form, I think. Where it's like, okay, we have one set. What kind of story can we tell? Like what's the most compelling story we can tell with what we have?
Right, and there are always these like mystery boxes. Mystery boxes.
I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, I think people know what genre we're talking about here. I just wanted to like call it out because it is a little exhausting to watch so many of these. Yeah. Because again, it's very rare. Like The Circle was surprising, but it was still what they all are.
Yeah.
Right. Like they have varying degrees of success, but like the basic premise is a group of strangers trapped in a place trying to get out and with the threat of death. And it turns out to be some sort of social experiment or represent like there's more of those than I'd like. And I guess it's mainly the Cube films.
Yeah.
So all that said, I don't know in Japan if they have a lot of them. Like remakes. I don't know. I'm always delighted by a remake, like a reverse remake. This was Cube was a Canadian film, but like, you know what I mean, where an English film gets remade in another country. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. The Japanese remake of Unforgiven rules, and everybody should watch it.
Right, and it feels okay. Like this feels like it has more right to exist than Cube Zero, you know?
It's a little bit different viewpoint. Like it has a different societal viewpoint that it wants to talk about. So like it's the same basic movie, but it's executed much differently.
Right. So how did you like this?
I thought it was okay. I thought it was mostly unnecessary because it is just Cube again. It's like
for the most part, they replace a few things, but yeah.
Yeah, it's in a way, it's basically like another Cube sequel. Like this could have been Cube 2.
Right. It's almost like just watching Cube again, because like the ending is essentially the same. Where you're like, I bet they won't explain it. They do add an element there, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. And it's more. There's more intent in this film behind. There's more intent behind the cube and what lesson we're supposed to learn and how like the survivor is chosen. There's more intent behind it. Like in the in the original Cube, they pick the disabled guy.
He gets out just out of pure luck.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah. It seems to be more tied to the fact that he's like not as deliberately harmful as the others.
Right. If people recall, for people who, I guess, didn't see Cube, I don't know why you're listening to this.
If you're listening to a podcast about a Cube remake, I don't know. Well, but maybe, I don't know.
Maybe you saw the Cube remake and not the original. But like the idea was like there was a character who was a cop and they present him as like, oh, he's going to be like the hero.
Yeah.
Right. And then slowly as the pressure builds, he's not in control and he loses his mind. And the idea is that people like him who are used to being in control don't know what it's like, how to handle being out of control. Mm-hmm. And so it was making an observation about certain types of people at the time. And so is this. And it does feel like we said, like kind of specific to, well, actually not specific to Japanese culture, but relevant to Japanese culture. And I would say culture around the world right now. Because it deals with a different subject.
Yeah, there's an element of like the elderly guy is the guy that has the power, or the older guy. And that's, as far as I understand, that's more of a thing in Japanese culture. But yeah, the gist of it, like the main thrust of it is just how much pressure we put on young people. Right.
And it was like, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
So even if you've seen the original Cube, there's certain elements here, which is like, oh, who's going to crack? Because you know someone's gonna, but you don't quite know who.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, how are they going to handle things? So like in this case, the characters that wake up, one of them is a convenience store clerk. One of them's like a shitty businessman that we meet later. One of them's a child who turns out to be like, he basically is the disabled man in the sense that he's the one who knows the math stuff and figures the stuff out, I believe. There is a woman.
To a point, like it's him and the main character.
Right.
Both work together on the math problems.
Character who, do we know
he's a student.
Their names. He's a student.
Yeah.
And then there's a very out of it lady played by Anne Watanabe. Tom?
Oh.
Yep. And I looked it up. She is in fact the daughter of Ken. Ken Watanabe.
Who is the star of the Unforgiven remake I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Synergy,
good for her.
Dave.
I'm rooting for her. Yeah. And I complained a lot about her in my notes at first.
Because she's not a character.
Exactly. And spoilers, that is actually on purpose.
That is very much on purpose because she is a robot. It is revealed in the end. But
yes.
Still, it's also...
It's revealed that she basically is running the cube from the inside. We don't know if she's created the cube, but she is clearly like working. She's a part of the cube.
She's clearly observing the people inside the cube and observing what they do and how they respond to it. And it's still kind of... she still is sort of frustrating because she's the only woman in the movie.
Exactly.
And even though it's like, well, she doesn't speak and she's not really a character, which becomes more and more glaring as the movie progresses, until you realize she's a robot. So it's like kind of tipping you off. But also it is still like there's no women in this movie, really.
Right. Here's I'm gonna do a little bit of because my notes were basically like, oh, okay, so the one woman character has no personality and doesn't talk. I think you could argue, and again, I don't know much about Japanese culture, but I do know about our culture. And like you could argue that the idea is that the woman is largely ignored because she's a woman, like, and they just don't think about her at all. And that's the point, is that like she's the answer and no one even fucking gives her a second thought.
Right.
You know?
Making the robot be a woman would sort of, that is sort of like if the people engineering the cube, I see how that works, because it's like, well, let's make the robot a woman because they won't think it's weird that she's not participating. They won't think it's weird that she's not fighting for control of the group. They won't think it's weird that she's just being quiet.
Right. And us watching it, they might have bet on us watching and going, these sexist motherfuckers, like talking about the writers, like being like, oh, the movie doesn't think women matter either. And then the reveal, of course, is like, no, she's literally the key to everything.
Yeah.
And so she's just that, like, that's the point.
So, right, like making her the robot could itself be a very loud piece of commentary. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, I don't know enough about like the filmmakers to know, but that does seem fair, you know, to like what we watched. And so going back to the idea of the original cube and all these films, which is we're making a commentary on society. I guess what I want to say is that this is a very good remake for that reason.
It is,
because
yeah.
I was wondering right away, like, do they know that about the original cube? And it does feel like they do, and they make their own observations based on it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, I'm trying to think of another good example. And I don't want to keep hitting the Unforgiven remake, but
right.
I guess I will, because like the Unforgiven seems to be a movie very specifically about American culture, right? Because it's about demystification of the legend of the Old West, right? Like, stripping away the fantasy of it, and here's the reality of it. And the Unforgiven remake does the same thing, just with sort of their romanticized culture around samurai and things like that. So it's like you can look at a movie and identify, it's about this is what it's commenting on, and then remake it so that it does the same thing, like you were just saying.
It understands the spirit of something.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't have to be about that. We understand what makes the remake matter.
Right. It doesn't need to be about the same literal events to understand the intent of the film and still pay tribute to that, I guess.
Yeah. And this film absolutely does that. And then it also knows the other part of what you expect of a Cube remake. Like, going into this, I'm sure you had this expectation too, even subconsciously, which is you were expecting to see new and weird traps, right?
I wasn't I wasn't sure at first, but they let you know right off the bat with the first person that gets killed gets a big cube cut out of their chest. So you're like, oh,
he gets cubed.
He sure does, Dave.
It's the same beginning. It's the guy getting up, and you're like, they want you to think he's the main character, and then in the original he gets Resident Evil'd. And in this one, he gets cubed. Girders come out. They also have a laser room. They have a blender room.
Technically, the guy in Resident Evil gets cubed as well, Dave.
That's a good point. He gets cubed.
Just many cubes.
Yeah. And I like that about this. Another thing I liked about this that I want to shout out is I thought the production sign was really good. Obviously, they're making it look like the original, but I would argue this looks better.
Well, yeah, of course it does.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the other one was made in 97.
Yeah, this is 25 years later that this movie came out.
Yeah, I would argue that they could have still made this set in that one. And the difference, and I kind of want to I won't. I was going to Google the original Cube set, but if I remember, the original Cube set was very weird, kind of gothy.
It's very gothic, yes. This one was more sleek.
It's functional. That's what I liked about it, is that it feels more real to the premise, where it's like, we're not going to make this look like cool.
A dungeon.
It's just, it's just like, it's functional. And so the lights are a lot more functional. And of course, they're all cubes. And that brings us to another difference, which is that, is emotion a factor?
It seems to be. Yeah.
Yeah, they never say it.
They don't overtly say a lot of things, but like it does seem like some traps get triggered when a certain emotion comes out, and you're queued up to it by the colored lights in the room start changing. They will turn the trap color red when a character starts getting more and more agitated, for instance, and then a trap happens.
And that was both really cool because that's a really easy way to show how a character's feeling, obviously. And it's also really good mood-wise and, cinematography-wise. And then the fact, at first I thought it was an artistic choice. And then the fact that it's an artistic choice and related to the plot.
Yeah.
And they never address it. And it's kind of, I don't know if that's good or bad. Like it never actually comes into play. It's more of just that they spend, I would argue this movie, unlike the original, spends a little more time on characters. Because we have a whole backstory of the main character. What we learn about the main character through actual flashbacks, which is also not in the original, is so it's, again, if you've seen Cube, you know what happens. Group of strangers wake up. They're trying to figure out how the fuck to get out of the cube. They eventually learn that there's math equations. Prime numbers mean there's a trap, I believe.
That turns out to be a false positive.
Right.
In both movies too.
Yeah. At first they throw shoes in the room to trigger the traps. They learn that some of the rooms are sound activated. All again, if you've seen Cube, it's all the same things. And then they realize that the cubes are moving. They figure out that it's there's one cube outside of the larger cube that's moving around, and you just have to get to the right room to go through. And then one of the characters, which we'll get more into, basically cracks, loses their mind and starts killing the rest, becomes a problem. And ultimately, the one seen as the most vulnerable gets out, which in this case is a child.
Mm-hmm.
In the original Cube, none of the characters really connected in any meaningful way. And we never really got, the arcs were just like, are you going to get out or not, right? Or like, are you going to lose your mind or not? Am I forgetting?
There were smaller arcs. The biggest one, obviously, is the cop turning evil. Even though the arc is, like we said earlier, the implication is that he was always evil. And then we learn that he's divorced from his wife for, I think, beating her and the kids. And the other arc is with the kind of wormy guy who is selfish the entire movie and then becomes unselfish by the end, just after, spending so much time working together with these people for a common goal. That's as complex as the arcs are in the original.
But if I recall, the main character ends up being that lady who never makes it out.
She dies.
Oh, and there's but she doesn't have an arc, right?
No, whereas we don't really know much about her. She's just really good at math.
Yeah. In this one, so what they do is with this main character, he's a student, like we said, and he starts, he kind of gloms onto this child, and you can instantly tell he does have some chip on his shoulder, right? Like there's a part where the child goes to fall, and he looks in the kid's eyes and almost doesn't save him because the kid's reaching out, and he's clearly has some sort of trauma. On top of that, there's an old man that we mentioned that they run into who is very demanding. He is of a father age, and he is very verbally abusive.
Right, and then he immediately assumes control, and when he shows up, the mood of the group change, they all become deferent, or they all defer to him.
Right. Yeah. And then there's also the convenience store guy who is very meek, a real beta cuck, as they say in the scientific field, Tom.
Yeah, that's science. That's an accepted term.
Yeah. He's very meek and polite, and the old guy just bosses him around instantly. He works at a convenience store, which comes into play. And then there's the cool guy. And the cool guy doesn't last as long as you think he will.
Lasts longer than I expected, though, because if you remember, the cool guy is occupying the character in the original film who was the escape artist. So he's the one that figures out to throw the shoe. So they're all oh, if anybody's going to get us out, it's him. And then he dies right away. So that you're like, oh no, the escape artist can figure it out. But in this movie, he lasts a while. And yeah, he is the guy that seems like, oh, okay, this guy like knows his shit. He's competent. He thinks outside the box. He's proactive. He's going to get us out of here. And he ends up dying, not because he fucks up, which is what kills the same character in the original. It's because in one of those moments when the little boy falls into the room, the main character freezes. So like cool guy has to jump in and help save them both. And in the act of getting them both out, he gets zapped. So he dies heroically as opposed to the guy in the original who dies because he fucks up.
Exactly. Which makes sense because self-sacrifice is a theme of this new one.
Yes.
And also they use that time that he's alive to establish the character so that when he dies, you sort of know like that was the leader. So now who's the leader?
Yeah. Who are we going to follow? Yeah.
Right. And that's an interesting dynamic with this group. But what I want to point out, what I'm sort of pointing out already is that all four of the other characters, the male characters, represent different stages of the same idea or different parts of the same idea. Yeah. So what we learn is that the main character, little brother, was horribly abused by their father and was extremely, like, it seemed like there was a lot of pressure for him to do well in school.
Yes.
And he kills himself. And he has this horrible memory of like his brother on this roof, and he tries to talk him down and he just fails miserably. He starts saying like to him, like, just try your best.
Right.
You know?
He starts repeating what we can infer is what their father always tells them. Well, you're just not trying as hard. Like, I'm not having the problems. Like, we have the same dad. I'm not having the same problems you are. Right. You're just not trying as hard.
Right. And that's like in the school of talking people down, you feel like the class number one, they'd be like, do not do that.
Yeah, well, point of fact is in the flashback, his brother says, that is the one thing, the only thing I did not want to hear right now.
He's just like, I don't know, maybe your will is weak. Yeah. Have you thought about that? So
maybe if you stopped being such a little bitch all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So his brother jumps.
Yeah.
And it clearly haunted him, and he clearly knew he said the wrong thing.
He blames himself, lots of guilt. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that's his damage that we learn throughout. And then we have this older man who, again, very verbally abusive, very much their father.
Yes.
And then we have this young boy who is revealed at one point. He sees his arm and realizes he has bruises on his arm. And this boy has been generally quiet and very good at math and very flinchy.
He straight up says, I don't like to be touched and I don't like adults.
Yep. And it's like, oh, got it.
He is beaten until he is smart at school. Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
then we have the convenience store guy, and at first he just seems innocuous. But spoilers, he's the guy who makes the turn.
He seems like an older version of the little boy, right? Because he defers to everyone. He's constantly apologizing, and he fucks up and gets the old guy injured by one of the traps, and the old guy will not let it go. He just keeps drilling into him for it.
Exactly.
And just keeps beating him down, and he keeps taking it. Like, he's like, I'm sorry. Like so you can see that he has just been, like the little boy, he has been a whipping boy his entire life.
Exactly. And
he's never, I was just going to say, he's never, you could also maybe infer that he could be the same kind of person that the main character's younger brother might have wound up. He's just
two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Because he's like, you old people, you think I'm crap. You know, you don't think I'm good enough. Mm-hmm. And it's clear that him working at a convenience store, which is a perfectly fine job, to him, it's clearly been ingrained in him that that's a failure.
He's failed, yeah.
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 And so it's like that idea of the brother growing up, like he either cracks under the pressure and kills himself, or you go the other way with it, which is what this character is.
Yeah.
And so this character cracks in the way that he becomes... he loses his mind.
Yeah, he just starts murdering. I'm sure everybody, hopefully not everybody, but it used to be, a just a chorus that you would hear growing up. Like, you need to do well in school unless you want to be flipping burgers. So that's the idea,
right,
of like him, like, I work at a convenience store, I'm a failure.
Right.
That's where that comes from.
Exactly. And so that's the equivalent, which is why this is so universal.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's definitely like a culture in Japan that they're commenting on here.
Mm-hmm.
But like, again, this is everywhere.
Yeah.
This sort of pressure. So like it's way more, the characters are set up way more intentionally. I would say, than the original Cube.
And it's more specific. I said earlier, there feels like there's more intent behind this one. And that's all I guess that's all I really mean, because there's a lot of intent in Cube, but like this is all built around one theme as opposed to a more general theme about like power structures in society, which I believe is kind of like the overall theme of the original movie.
Right, but it's a lot looser.
Yeah,
it's a lot more
pretty loose,
generic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is all to say, Tom, I think this is the better film.
I think I got more out of this. Like, it's hard to.
I know it's not fair to the original Cube to say that,
right?
Because it's obviously building off of that premise.
Exactly, yeah. And like, it didn't. The filmmaking of this one obviously didn't strike me the same way as the original did, because for a number of reasons. One, I saw the original 25 years ago, so like, but
right.
It's not as. So it's not. I wouldn't call it necessarily superior in that way, but like, I think I would agree that like thematically, this is the stronger film.
I think it's built better. And I think that's like a weird comparison, but like, someone does a speed run of a video game. The person who breaks their record is probably using a lot of their techniques. It's that they're building upon something that already happened. And so naturally, and that's why I mean, like, I think there's a really strong remake, because they saw the original and said, we really like what you did. We have some ideas of how to improve it, basically. Mm-hmm. And they built a more, I would say, just like a cleaner version of that film. There's still some, like the robot. It's like, I don't know about that robot if we needed that.
Yeah.
You could, obviously the effects are better, but it's like maybe the traps in this are kind of sillier. That weird tree spike, I was like, I don't know what that is.
It's pretty gnarly though.
It is. It was pretty cool. He survives that room, the main character. Spoilers. Ends with the main character opening his eyes still in the cube. That also I didn't feel like we needed, because it was like, what are you going to make a sequel? Seriously?
I think the idea was that he reached an epiphany, and we didn't want to. Maybe the filmmakers didn't want to punish him for that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was it makes sense.
Yeah,
but it is sort of the whole point is that this character basically makes up for what he didn't do for his brother, essentially, right?
Yeah, by rescuing the little boy and sort of like
Yeah. And so like all of that, it's just, I think ultimately the fact that they did so much work and that all the characters, they didn't waste any of the characters. They all had a reason to exist ultimately, even though one of them, it didn't seem like it.
Yeah, I think the cast is also smaller in this one. There's like one or two fewer characters.
Yeah, you're right.
For that reason.
Yeah. So if you're wondering, basically at one point they get separated, and you instantly know it's not going to be good, because the people that separated are the rest of the group, and then the convenience store guy and the shitty old guy, analog for the father.
Yeah,
and
shitty old dad.
Yeah, and I don't know about you. At that point, I was like, oh, okay, so he's going to kill the old guy, because they needed a twist, Well,
yeah, and like we said, because it's a Cube movie, we're waiting for one of these fuckers to flip, right? And so,
and the old guy is instantly evil, and it's like, well, it's not going to be him.
I was still kind of surprised, because they sort of tell you that it's going to be convenience store guy right before they split off, because he's in the corner. He has a tick that he does where he picks at his thumbnail when he's agitated or nervous. His
smile later is really good. That guy did a good job.
He's very good. Yeah. So they play a beat with him in the corner. And I forget exactly what he says, but the mask drops ever so slightly right before they split up. So you're like, oh, And then he like shuffles over. He's like, "Don't worry, I'll go with them." And then he falls. And I was like, "Well, we're never going to see that old guy again."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they do the thing with the old guy, and not that they needed to, and they didn't do it too much, where the old guy's like kind of okay at the end, in the sense that he's an asshole, and then the reveal is like, he's an asshole, he isn't a sociopath. Like at the point where they split up, he's just like, look, I'm injured, I'm old, I get it. I hate young people. I think he says that.
He says it a few times, and in point of fact, right before the clerk kills him, they have a conversation where he's telling him why he hates young people, and so we see that he's an asshole, but he's not a sociopath, and he's also just as much a product of the same system. Like he's the final form, basically, of like what the main character is going to become, because he survived the abuse, and so he could possibly become this old bitter version of himself. It's just like, well, anyone who couldn't get through it like I did is just weak,
right?
And then once everything
and he's a source of abuse. It's the cycle. It's a cycle, a cube, if you will,
where cube,
there's
if you will.
I do love that trope. It always gets me every time. I think of like in the Dawn of the Dead remake, the shitty mall security guy who keeps saying fucking babysitting, and then at the end he sacrifices his life, and that's the last thing he says.
He says it fucking figures, and he blows himself up.
And so like I love the idea of the asshole who is an asshole, but he's not he's a bad person, but he's not a sociopath. And that's kind of what happens here. Is like at the end he's just like, fuck you all, I guess I'll go do the right thing. Sort of. In this case it's getting his head repeatedly slammed.
Oh yeah. He gets his little face, he gets kingpinned, Dave.
He does.
Yeah.
He super does.
He kingpins him,
yeah. Let's see. I'm looking at my notes.
There's not too much else that I flagged. The movie's not, well, it's almost 2 hours. I was about to say it's not super long, but it's not short.
It felt longer than the original.
I think it might be. I think the original's like 90 minutes, I feel like. Maybe it's not. That could just be my faulty memory. But I didn't have really too much more to flag.
No, there's, again, aesthetic differences. So the traps are different. The blender room was cool.
Oh, yeah.
I really like the characters. That really is what saved this movie for me, is had they just done a straight remake, I don't know what we would have talked about. And had they completely like changed it, but not in a way that mattered, that would have been really bad. And so like, big kudos to them. And then there's just like weird extra stuff. And this was what I would say is the worst part of the movie, is that, like, again, we talked about the robot, and that feels like an extra piece of the puzzle that's sort of like hanging out. You know what I mean? Where it doesn't feel clean. Mm-hmm. It ultimately didn't really make the movie better. And then there's like the part where he sees the flashback. He sees it in the room. Like the room like projects it or something.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell.
It like scans his brain. But at that point the movie has kind of already told us that it like can read your emotions and stuff.
Right.
So like that, and then, that was surprising, but it didn't like take me out of it. Like I was like, the movie had prepared me enough for that I just took it in stride. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in comparison to the original, and then like they kept cutting away to like that graphic of a cube, and like it was like weird particles, and I think the reveal is that that's in the robot, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, which that's kind of cool. You're right. Like they keep cutting away to this graphic and you wonder like, oh, who's watching that on a screen? The reveal is no one is. It's in the lady. It's all to say that and then the emotion stuff, it's sort of adding a little more mystery box to Cube that maybe it didn't need. I don't know. Like Cube was already kind of a very streamlined concept, you know?
Yeah, I think adding the robot actually diminishes the mystery box quality a little bit, because it gives a little more firm answer as to what's going on. Like it becomes clear that this is sort of like a Saw game that's like evaluating each person and trying to drag them to an epiphany.
Right, and I guess that's what it is that the first cube, ignoring the sequels, the biggest part about the first cube is the ending when he walks into the light and the movie ends and you go, motherfuckers. And you're mad, but you also know, like, of course. They're not going to tell us what's outside the cube or what the cube is. And this still doesn't tell us what's outside the cube or what the cube is specifically. But the robot, that's what I mean, is the robot feels messy and that it's like, we don't really need, like, either answer it or don't. And that's like in between. And again, Cube 2 completely shits the bed with that.
Yeah.
But
Cube 2 is not good.
Yeah, no. And I would argue the other cubes in general. Yeah. I remember there's some fun moments, but.
Yeah. Generally not very good.
Yeah. So I would say, like, yeah, the robot in this is like, I don't know if I needed that. I do like if that is their intent, the fact that she's a woman and what that says, that's a cool idea. But also the emotion room, as cool as that was, it also feels kind of needless.
It was underexplored. Yeah, I don't ultimately don't understand why it was there, other than to give both another dimension to the cube. So you're like, oh shit, like it's not just pressure plates or sound. This can like feel your emotions and that can trigger a trap. Right. But also the only person who triggers it is the clerk. And so it's like an early hint that when he's agitated, but he's not angry. It's just he's getting berated so much that he's freaking out, and the room turns red. So like in a second watch, you'd be like, oh, this is kind of the movie telling us that he's gonna turn red, as it were. You know, like he's gonna flip.
But what they could have done, if they really wanted to use that mechanism, because if you remember in the original Cube, there's that realization, oh, some of these are sound activated, and they have to go through a room and be quiet. And that's the tension. They do that again in this, the sound activated. They should have had that moment be, oh, it's emotion activated, and do the same bit, but they're walking through the room and they have to control their emotions. Like, that would be the better way, is have the characters realize it and then create a challenge based on it. And it's weird to me that they would introduce it and then not do that.
Yeah, the movie is not really interested in building suspense, it doesn't seem.
No, and it just feels like it didn't use the cube as good as the original. Like, if they're going to add ideas to the cube, use them for suspense or for something to happen. And it felt like they felt like, well, we better add some new gizmos to the cube to make it fresh from the original, but they didn't have a function, which is, kind of the weak point. Whereas the strong point is the fact that they were like, well, let's focus on making the characters matter more.
Yeah.
Which you could argue is the better thing to focus on, but it's weird they couldn't do both.
They're both equal. They're both of equal merit. It just depends on what kind of movie you're trying to make, you know?
Right.
Like, if you want to make a suspense thriller, obviously you lean on the suspense stuff. But if you want to make like a drama tragedy or whatever with some horror mixed in there, then you go the other route.
Right. It just would have been way more relevant, right?
Yeah.
Because instead of the sound room, imagine the emotion room, and then them having to like reassure the kid, and like the kid's scared and they're like, no, you're okay. Like, and the whole thing is about pressure, and, you know, like that the old guy wouldn't be capable of assuring the kid, you know, and it would play into the themes. It's just kind of a misstep, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Movie. You're right. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, and they were so close. They were so close to it that I feel like there was like a cut scene where they do it, you know?
Maybe, yeah. It's because it's an idea that gets introduced and then sort of dropped, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's, I guess, my biggest criticism of this film.
I noticed this has like really low scores. Not that means anything, but it's got like 4 stars on IMDb.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know why that is. I think I like this more than Cube, the original, for the reasons I've stated, and I do think it's a better made film, but again, I recognize that it wouldn't exist without the original Cube.
Yeah.
And the original Cube plays a big role in what makes this movie good. So it's just weird to me that people wouldn't like this one.
I guess it depends if you're like a hardcore Cube fan.
A cubert. I believe they're called
yeah,
cuberts.
real cubert. Yeah, real cube head.
Yep.
I think you'd be into this, but if you're a person who is more like wanting to watch a horror movie where people get killed by interesting traps, this is not that movie.
Right.
Like
maybe that is what people thought. I didn't even think about it that way. It's funny. I don't think about the original Cube. Like, they're not Saw films to me, where it's like, ooh, what new elaborate trap is going to be next? Like, yes, that's an element in these, but both movies, even the sequels, it's not really like the idea is the puzzle of it all, right?
Yeah, the mystery, the sort of the unknown, the fear about being in this situation, not understanding what it is.
Right. Maybe maybe people were upset because they didn't change what the puzzle was, like how the cube worked. Maybe people were expecting some cool, exciting.
Why mess with that? They
exactly.
try
I
it,
agree.
They try it in Cube 2 Hypercube and it immediately falls apart.
Exactly. I agree. Why mess with it?
Leave it the same, man.
Yeah, I just don't like. Now I'm wondering, Cube fans, diehard Cube fans. Now I'm asking the question: why would they want like Cube? What are they watching it for? You know, the way like you watch Friday the 13th for the fun kills.
What are the essential elements of a good Cube film? Yeah, which is hard to say because there was only one. Now I think there's two because I like this one.
Yeah, I think there's two as well.
Uh-huh.
I think traps are low on the list, but they are fun. Like, had they just kept the same traps, I think I still would have liked this film plenty. But it's like, yeah, why not update the traps?
Yeah, why not? Why not do something different? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't watch it for the traps, and I don't watch it even for the puzzles, because again, there's been only one good version of that. Well, if someone thinks up a better puzzle version of Cube, then good for them. I'll enjoy that, you know?
I will say that the thing that stuck with me the most about the original Cube and why I have gone back and rewatched it a few times over the years since isn't the traps, or it is what's going on with the characters. Like I agree. It's the turn with who you think is the hero turns out not to be, and then the kind of wormy guy that you think is going to be a weasel, he turns out to, like, it's the character stuff that is what made the movie more memorable to me than any other aspect of it.
Yeah, hard agree. I think the Cube itself isn't terribly interesting across the board.
No.
It's you look at the Cube and you're like, oh, got it. I got it. It's you needed a limited set and you want to do a character piece. It's about the characters, not the puzzles. The puzzle is there to be as complex as they need it to be. Hard agree that's, I think, why a Cube movie works, which is why this movie and the original work.
Yes.
And the sequels fail because the sequels are focused on the other stuff more than the characters, right?
Yeah.
They're like, what wacky traps can we do? And, you know, and it's like, I don't know if I give a shit, to be honest.
Yeah. Pretty sure I don't.
Yeah, because the thing about the traps is like, why isn't that interesting and like watching Jason Voorhees kill someone in Jason X interesting? And I think the difference is that the traps, no matter how weird they are in Cube, they're all still the same, which is you go in a room and then the room does something. And what that room does might be interesting in some neat way where it's like, oh, cool, like spikes or lasers, but there's not enough to them.
Yeah,
for like any sort of like dynamic that's interesting.
Right. Like, how many times can you have a character walk into a room and get killed by some goofball mousetrap? Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, oh, this time it freezes them, or this time it cuts them in half. And it's like, cool, that looks fun. Like, again, I'm not complaining about them. They're just not the star of the movie by any means.
It's hard to do that for a whole movie and make it interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where there were the people who time fucked. Remember that? Where they fucked so hard they
fucked into dust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Not good, but fun.
Hypercube.
Hypercube. God damn it.
All right. I don't have anything else to say about this movie.
Nor do I.
Okay.
I think if you like the original Cube, check this out. You shouldn't have listened to the podcast.
Probably not.
I'm sorry. Yeah. If you've never seen either cube, go back and watch 1997's Cube, and then watch this cube. If you don't like cubes, don't do anything. You're all set.
Stay very
You're
far
good to
away.
go.
Yeah, you fulfilled every requirement that you need.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good work.
No obligation. No further obligations await you.
Yeah, exactly. But thanks for listening.
Yeah.
And thank you to Burrito Mouth for bringing this Cube remake to our attention. We knew we were going to have to watch it at some point. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, burritos famously cube shaped.
Yep. That sounds delicious.
A burrito cube.
pop in-
a
burrito cube?
A cube burrito.
Yeah, dude. First person to do that, they're gonna be a millionaire.
Yeah.
That's $1 million idea right there. We just gave to the world.
Mm-hmm. It's a race to see who
Yeah.
puts it out
The race
first.
is on.
Yeah.
Listen, Tom, you hear about our Patreon?
I
We have a
haven't.
Patreon. It's patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. There's exclusive podcasts on there for just $5 a month. You get access to Tom and Jeff Watch Batman, Fox Mulder's Maniac, Star Trek The Next Futurama, and Spiel Boys. Those are all available for $5 a month. There are other tiers, like one where we watch movies every Friday night with our patrons. I don't know if we'd watch the cubes. I guess we could. They're just kind
I think we have.
Oh, no shit.
I think we've watched.
I
at
don't
least
know.
one of
I don't
them,
know
yeah.
if I don't think we've watched the sequels. Yeah. So go on there, check it out.
We also have a store. Head over to gamefortheunemployed.com where you can find a link to our Teespring store where we have all kinds of cool original artwork and designs that you can get on t-shirts, mugs, stickers, posters, all sorts of things. So slap your little cubers on that.
Yeah, and you can rate us on the wherever you get podcasts. I guess
wherever
if you're a Cube fan, like give us 5 cubes or whatever.
Yeah.
You know. Cube on. Cube away.
Cube the rating though, so that it's higher. Yeah.
Oh yeah, put a little like cube next. Yeah, put a little like a 2 or whatever.
It's a 3.
It's a 3. Holy shit! What's a 4, Tom?
I don't know, man. That's too much. That's too many numbers.